It's an early morning of February 24th, 2022. Just minutes after the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, declares his special military operation, or simply full-scale invasion in Ukraine, the Russian 3M54 caliber cruise missile is on its way towards its target. First, it seems like it will strike the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv, like many other missiles today. However, its real target is the military base 3018 of the National Guard of Ukraine, just 10 kilometers away from the city. Around 6 a.m., the missile explodes on the empty exercise ground in front of the barracks. A couple of minutes later, another one hits near the local residential buildings. This is the first attack on a small town which will become known for one of the most significant and fierce battles of the first days of full-scale Russian invasion. This town is called Hostomel. The missiles struck the military base near Antonov Airport, also called Hostomel Airport. It's an international cargo air hub and testing facility that is located in the northern part of the small town of Hostomel. The complex was built in 1959 and includes 2 closed-heated hangars for maintenance and repair work, control tower, and multiple administrative and research buildings. Its unique feature is a reinforced concrete runway, 3,500 meters long and 56 meters wide, suitable for the landing of the extremely heavy planes. At the time of invasion, the largest aircraft in the world, the mighty AN-225 Mriya, is under the maintenance in one of the hangars. At approximately 5 a.m., around 200 conscripts from the local military base of the Ukrainian National Guard, which was the target of the recent missile attack, moved towards the airport and organized the defensive positions under the command of the 35-year-old Vitaly Rudenko. Armed only with small arms, Soviet-made band pads, and several Zu-23-2 anti-aircraft guns, the conscripts are now responsible for defending a huge, strategically important area of Antonov Airport. Having a shortage of men, as many of the National Guard professional members were sent to reinforce other directions before the war, there is no way to organize the defensive perimeter, so soldiers split into small groups and spread across the area on military trucks. Most of them belonged to a supply battalion, which was responsible for firefighting, patrolling and clerical duties, not combat operations. In about 4 hours, conscripts of the 4th Special Rapid Reaction Brigade will be reinforced with a couple of smaller National Guard units, such as the 1st Brigade of Operational Purpose and Omega Special Anti-Terrorism Unit. They arrived on a couple of armored vehicles and essentially had the same armament as their colleagues from the 4th Brigade. At the same time, 170 kilometers from the Hostomel airport, a large group of Russian helicopters prepares to take off from Bokov airport, near Mazur, Belarus. There is no less than 34 machines in total, mostly Mi-8s with airborne troops on board, reinforced with over 10 modern K-52s and a few older Mi-24 and Mi-28s attack helicopters. Staying in Belarus airspace as long as they can, the first wave of attack helicopters crossed the Ukrainian border unnoticed at approximately 9:30 a.m. Lightly armed Mi-8s with troops departing the second wave, which accompanies the first one. Following the path above the wide Dnipro River, the first wave travels directly to the south in a long formation. As they approach the capital from the north, they take a sharp turn near the Kyiv hydroelectric power plant. At this very moment, the Ukrainian missile impacts one of the helicopters, forcing it to perform a crash landing. Almost simultaneously, another direct hit is scored, forcing the Russian Mi-24 to quickly lose altitude and disappear in the calm waters of the water bank. The rest of the machines start dropping flares to lower their chances of being hit, and rush toward the riverbank to avoid the fate of the 2 destroyed aircraft. As of 10:30 a.m., Russia suffers its first losses on its way to Hostomel. Now, the lone formation breaks into two groups. Forces of Group A fly to the northwest to attack the airport from the north, inspecting and if necessary clearing the runway. Group B, on the other hand, flies southwest to approach the airfield from the south. Their mission is to cut off the base of the 4th Ukrainian Special Rapid Reaction Brigade of the National Guard from the airport and destroy the defenders stationed there. Around 11 am, the helicopter groups finally arrive at Hostomel. As helicopters from both groups approach the airport, K-52s, Mi-28s and Mi-24 are the first ones to unleash the unguided rockets and autocannon fire on defenders. However, instead of a surprise attack on a formation of unorganized troops, invaders face a spread out National Guard groups that immediately open fire with all weapons that they have. One of the defenders, Sergei Fatalyuk, runs to the airstrip of the airport with Soviet Iglaman pad. He aims at the Russian K-52 flying directly at him, but the distance is too short for launch and the helicopter passes over him. Sergei immediately turns around and after a brief aiming, launches his missile into the tail of the enemy helicopter. Missile tracks down the machine, forcing it to crash right on the airstrip and immediately explode. This incident proves the vulnerability of the most modern Russian helicopters to manpads, even as obsolete as Igla, developed in 1971. As more and more attack helicopters engage in the fight, Mi-8s arrive, but most of them have trouble landing with troops aboard due to intense fire. Rockets and autocannons of helicopters destroy the airport fuel tanks and a couple of planes near the airstrip, covering the skies in a black smoke. Heavy damage is inflicted on hangars and overall airport infrastructure. However, this provides little help to invading forces, as Russia loses 3 K-52s and the Mi-28 in the different parts of the airport.
Да слышь. Ух ты ж, елки-палки. Сбили что-то. Ё-моё.
Да, мам.
С вертолета, 2 вертолета.
Привет.
Один подбили, а второй что-то, смотри, падает.
У нас стреляют. Да, вон вертолет. Сережа снимает видео, я тебе потом пришлю.
Он подбитый, смотри, сейчас
Всё
будет падать.
Блин,
Один уже
давай.
сбили.
Ну прямо с балкона снимаем. Ну,
Садится, смотри, на поле.
с балкона. С балкона вот влево, тут лес, у нас и поля.
Сел.
Да.
Мужики, я подбит, кто видит кашку, обозначаю себя, иду на вынужденную. Борт управляем, Позывной 865, стойка первая не выпущена, отставить. У нас редуктор скоро развалится.
One Mi-8 is critically damaged and cannot take off, so Russians later blow it up to prevent capture. A considerable number of Ukrainian forces also were protecting the base of National Guard, including firefighters who damaged multiple Russian helicopters with machine gun and rifle fire. As the fight continues for another hour, the National Guard soldiers are short on ammunition and are ordered to start retreating in an organized manner toward their base. This allows all Russian Mi-8s to finally land on the western outskirts of the airport and deploy all their elite troops. Another group of helicopters drops off VDV forces on the northeastern outskirts of Hostomel airport to cut off the National Guard base. At least 100 men from Russian 31st Guards Airborne Assault Brigade and 18th Separate Guards Air Assault Brigade were deployed in the first wave. Armed with various grenade launchers, portable mortars, and small arms, elite troops moved from different landing sites on the outskirts of the airport toward the main runway and secure it without much resistance. However, they do not immediately advance toward the airport buildings. As more Mi-8s land, at least one more wave of troops arrives to total the number of Russians on the airfield to around 300 men, which allows the invaders to continue their advance. They move cautiously through the administrative buildings towards the flight control tower. First on-ground contact with Russian troops happens when the commander of the company of Ukrainian troops drives to the crossroad near the control tower. His armored vehicle is hit by the grenade launcher, but the grenade miraculously doesn't penetrate, and he is forced to make a full circle around the hangar under the enemy fire to return back to his forces. Most Russian troops meet face to face with defenders here, and the fight begins for almost 2 hours. Nevertheless, Ukraine National Guard groups have to retreat into the city through their base, as they are outnumbered and short of ammunition. As of 1 p.m., the total area of Hostomel airport falls into the hands of Russians. Even after taking into account heavy casualties, the assault seems to be a victory, and Russian troops raise their flag on the main administrative building. Little do they know that the real fight has not yet begun. If we look at the bigger picture, many sources explain such focus on Hostomel with the Russian desire to quickly take Kyiv and overthrow the government, preventing further organized resistance. For this reason, it was necessary to quickly transfer at least 1,000 airborne troops to the city's doorstep. However, the land invasion through the shortest pass from Belarus is an unfavorable scenario, as invading forces would be easily caught up in the fights in the north of Ukraine, and even in the case of breaching, could still be subject to multiple ambushes on their way. Instead, the Russian military command decided to clear Hostomel with helicopter attack, deploy around a battalion of airborne troops, and then create an air bridge between the captured Hostomel and Pskov. This explanation is proposed by Christo Grozev, a head of international group of investigative journalists Bellingcat, who announced that 18 Russian transport aircraft, Il-76, fly from Pskov to Kyiv directly as Russian forces gain a foothold in Hostomel. Capable of carrying over 1,000 troops in total, and even light armored vehicles, they plan to arrive in Hostomel, which is the most suitable airport near Kyiv for such heavy planes to land on. In case of success, over 1,000 men with light armored vehicles deployed right near the capital would put Kyiv in a serious danger. However, the Russian military command failed to predict how events will unravel. Due to fierce resistance, the helicopter groups not only take significant losses, but also waste precious time circling around without a chance to land. As lightly armed infantry of the Ukrainian Force Special Rapid Reaction Brigade that initially protected the airport slowly retreat under the pressure of oncoming waves of Russians, they gave time for the forces of 72nd Separate Mechanized, 80th and 95th Separate Airborne Assault Brigades to deploy and encircle the Hostomel airport. While Ukrainian Light Airborne Brigades arrived quickly from Zhytomyr on transport helicopters, the 72nd Mechanized Brigade has to move their heavy tanks and artillery over 100 kilometers from their base in Bila Tserkva. Therefore, the time factor was critical in this situation. As Russian forces do not advance further and most likely have strict orders to guard the airport until the main forces arrive on strategic airlifters, there is a brief pause in fighting. This allows Ukrainians to bring artillery into positions to support their counterattack. At 3:30 p.m., the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, in his address to the nation, declares that the encirclement of the Hostomel airport is complete and gives the order to clear the area.
Ворожений десант в Гостомелі блокують. Війська отримали наказ на знищення.
Approximately at the same time, the artillery of the armed forces and the National Guard of Ukraine, as well as Ukrainian Su-24 bombers, attack the airport with shells and bombs. Ukrainian military command correctly predicts the Russian plans, and the idea behind an intense artillery barrage and airstrikes is to damage the airstrip beyond repair. Furthermore, Ukrainian land forces start to advance from multiple directions with close air support of Mi-24 helicopters with unguided rockets on board. As a result of fierce fight, Russians sustain heavy casualties and are forced to desert into the fields and forests around the airport. It's also worth mentioning that active assistance in counterattack was provided by Georgian Legion, a military unit formed by mostly ethnic Georgian volunteers fighting on the side of Ukraine since 2014. As of 9 p.m., Hostomel airport is under the control of Ukrainian armed forces, which marks their most significant victory on the first day of full-scale Russian invasion. Russian military command has to abort the mission of delivering more forces into the area by air, and all planes which departed from Pskov land in Belarus. Looking at the bigger picture, the situation still remained pretty dangerous for Ukrainians. During the intense fighting for the airport earlier this day, Russians crossed the border from Belarus territory and quickly traversed through the radioactive Chernobyl exclusion zone, where Ukrainian forces did not have any defensive lines. During the night of February 24th and morning of February 25th, a large number of Russian troops in heavy armor arrived on the outskirts of Hostomel, and the fight for the airport turned into the battle for the whole town. Such a fast advance through the north of Ukraine was a success on tactical level, but a failure on the operational one. As time passed, it becomes clear that Russians cannot supply their forces near Kyiv for an effective advance into the city, since they only secured individual roads in their rapid advance, not key towns, that has the potential to become a forward operating bases. On February 25th, however, Ukrainians are forced to retreat from Hostomel airport under the pressure of several Russian battalion tactical groups. To prevent any further attempts to establish an air bridge, Ukrainian artillery again launches a heavy shelling of the area that completely demolishes the Antonov Airport airstrip and causes massive casualties among Russian units on the territory of the airfield, which further slows down invading forces. As of March 5th, the town of Hostomel fell into the hands of Russians, but no further advance was made. Ukrainian forces carried out attempts to counterattack and even had partial success on March 16th. On April 1st, 2022, Russian armed forces left Hostomel, as well as the whole north of Ukraine. The decision to retreat is explained by high Russian casualties, poor logistics, and overall lack of progress in taking control over Kyiv due to effective resistance of the Ukrainian forces in the area. In conclusion, the battle for Hostomel airport became the first one in a sequence of disastrous defeats during Russian attempts to conquer Ukraine in a fast-paced manner. The whole operation counted on a complete absence of resistance. Ukrainian troops and command, however, used an agile approach and had remarkable communication and planning, which allowed them to mitigate multiple threats. Even though initially everything went according to the Putin's plan, the defenders of the airport efficiently used little resources they had to maximize the harm to invaders and led more prepared units to encircle strategically important area. The following Ukrainian counterattack not only wiped out the elite Russian forces, but also ruined the whole plan with the air bridge and fast capital takeover. This forced Russians to attack through the forest on the north of Ukraine, where their logistical lines were crippled by constant ambushes. Therefore, the battle for Hostomel airport defined further military operations in the area and, most likely, was one of the reasons why Russia had to withdraw from north of Ukraine in April. During the battle, heavy damage was inflicted on the largest plane in the world, An-225 Mriya, which was under the maintenance in one of the hangars. Practically destroyed, the plane, whose name is Dream in Ukrainian, became one of the numerous symbols of war and Ukrainian defiance.